we're going to conclude our formal event here today. Just a moment, Hal. I want to introduce Hal Cooper, who largely. Yeah, I think I would. I'm going to play a short clip to introduce you, Hal. So you might want to sit. Hal Cooper, who is, as Dave said, an economist who's designed a lot of projects for the planet, and largely got the NAWAPA project off the ground through a lot of our conference calls, but also showing just kind of what the logistical supply line aspect of the project would require. And I actually made a video completely based on Hal Cooper's work and his feasibility studies. And I wanted to play a clip of that video before inviting him to come up and elaborate on this whole aspect of the program. So it's a 5-minute clip. I want to play that clip. Yeah. This is the video that I made based on his program. You want to cut the lights? The construction of the NAWAPA system will necessitate a reindustrialization of the Midwest. The design designates that construction will begin with a dense collection of large reservoirs, tunnels, and pumping systems to be built in Idaho, and a 500-mile main storage reservoir in southern British Columbia. We will first look at the rail connections between these first stages of NAWAPA and the Midwest. This will involve mainly the Union Pacific Railroad and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad from the Midwest into Idaho, and the Canadian Pacific Railroad into southern British Columbia. To be able to handle the materials necessary for NAWAPA and related support centers, the Union Pacific would have to be double-tracked in Iowa and western Illinois. Across Wyoming, it is presently double-tracked and will need a third track. As it approaches Idaho, where it is primarily single-tracked, it will need to be double-tracked all the way out to Portland, Oregon. The Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad is all single-tracked and will need double tracking, especially as it crosses Montana. Additional rail lines across the Bitterroot Mountains will be needed. A few choice routes along the Canadian Pacific Railroad will also need double tracking. The construction of these supply lines alone, long before any construction would begin on NAWAPA itself, along with the gearing up of national industries to produce and design the needed supplies to be hauled along these routes, would be enough to reverse the current tidal wave of physical economic collapse and ongoing disintegration of the United States, and employ and restore decency to the 35% of construction workers, skilled laborers, and engineers who are currently unemployed. The duration of the development of these Midwest lines and the estimated 5-year construction of the transfer function of NAWAPA will cover the lead time for preparation of the collection function of NAWAPA and be accompanied by the simultaneous construction of the Canadian-Alaskan Railway, whose main route is estimated to take 5 years and can be begun immediately since it has been rigorously studied and planned out under former Alaskan Governor Murkowski and other private studies. Some ways north of Prince George, British Columbia, a city which will become a major center through its role in managing the upper Fraser Lift of the NAWAPA system, the present Canadian Railway ends, a 250-mile line currently for sale by the government of British Columbia for $1. From there, and just north of Dawson Creek, 2 single-track lines to Fairbanks will be built to connect Alaska and the Yukon Territory with British Columbia, for a total of approximately 2,000 miles of rail. The first to be built runs from Dease Lake through Jake's Corner and Whitehorse, with its main line continuing near Tok Junction and on to Fairbanks. The next line built will run from Fort Nelson, a major urban center of the future, past Watson Lake in the Yukon, and from there to Pelly Crossing and Dawson, before crossing into Alaska and making its way to Fairbanks. Despite some rerouting that will be needed, The eastern line from Fort Nelson will serve well for the construction of the Liard River Dam, as well as passing right through Dawson, supplying materials for the construction of the 900-foot Dawson Dam of the NAWAPA design, and other dams forming the Yukon and Eagle reservoirs. The Dease Lake line will aid in supplying materials for the construction of the 5 Stewart dams of Nass Reservoir. And further north, once the line is rerouted east of the Tanana Valley, this line will be perfectly situated for supplying the construction of the 30-mile-long Alaskan Tunnel and Tanacross Dam of the NAWAPA design, as well as serve as a possible source for a new line toward the Copper River Valley.
It's very gratifying to see this movie and seeing some of these ideas beginning to take life of their own and moving ahead. You know, the last speaker was talking about these complexes for nuclear power. There is one that I think really can happen relatively immediately, is at Fort McMurray in Alberta, with the processing of the Athabasca tar sands oil deposits, because you're going to need very large amounts of steam. It isn't known, but if Canada actually goes ahead and reaches its goal of producing 4 million barrels a day of oil from the Athabasca tar sands, then it's going to take the entire natural gas production of Alberta to service it. There won't be any gas left for anywhere else in Alberta. There's none can be exported to California or Washington or anywhere else. It's all going to have to be used there at the tar sands. And they're going to create a lake of waste water, which will be as big as Lake Ontario out of Lake Athabasca. Obviously, it would be better if we could take this wastewater, clean it up, run it through a nuclear reactor, turn it into steam, and put it back in the ground and recycle it, rather than creating Lake Ontario's of waste. At the same time, we're using up the province's entire natural gas allocation. That is something we all should be aware of. Well, the NAWAPA project is going to require somewhere between 200 million and 240 million acre-feet per year of water, approximately half and half coming from the Yukon and Mackenzie River basins. When I did the feasibility study of the Alaska-Canada Railroad, I had a chance to see both of those rivers, and I drove through through as close to the Liard River Canyon as you can. You can't go through all of it on a road. I wouldn't even want to try it in a canoe. Canada will receive about 70 million acre-feet of water. Mexico about 20, and the United States about 115 million acre-feet. 70 of that will go to the western United States, and the rest will go through the Dakota Canal to the east. Some of it will end up replenishing the Great Lakes, and some of Canada's water will also. We'll be able to irrigate up to 15 million acres of land in Canada for agriculture, and 40 million acres in the United States, and somewhere about between 5 and 10 million acres in northern Mexico, particularly in the provinces, or excuse me, in the states of Chihuahua and Sonora and Baja California Norte. The project will generate about 100,000 megawatts of electricity. It will require somewhere around 30,000 megawatts for its own uses, primarily at the Sawtooth pumping and in several other places. But it will have a surplus. There will be about 30,000 megawatts of net power in Canada, about 40,000 in the United States, and less than 2,000 in Mexico. A relatively small amount of the water goes to Mexico from NAWAPA. Now, one of the LaRouche organization's supporters, Manuel Frias in Mexico City, who owns an engineering company there, who spoke in Ottawa in December of 2007, presented the ideas of parallel projects in Mexico, the Pligon and the Plino projects, which are on the eastern and western sides of Mexico, taking water from the water-rich south to the water-deficient north. And those actually can integrate in with the NAWAPA project in the north of Mexico. And I think, as most of you know, there's been severe droughts in South Texas and northern Mexico in the past. We have some previous examples of projects. I I gave a handout to everyone here, and some of this information is included. California, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, went on a real program to sell a water infrastructure program, which is the nearest thing we have in the United States to NAWAPA. It basically involved moving up to 9 million acre feet of water a year, and it would require somewhere on the order of 3,000 to 5,000 megawatts, depending on the time of the year. And in November of 1962, the voters, including myself, because I was a registered voter in California then, living in Pasadena, passed a bond issue for $2.6 billion under then Governor Pat Brown. And ultimately, that project came into fruition. It involved pumping somewhat over 2.5 million acre feet out of the delta of the San Joaquin and Sacramento rivers near Tracy, California, south, and a portion of it went over the mountains to Southern California, but primarily it was in the San Joaquin Valley. There is a problem today. There isn't enough water in the delta at times of water drought, and unfortunately people like Nancy Pelosi, which to show you how misguided she is, and how misintentioned she is also, did everything possible to make sure that there was no water available for the farms in the California Water Project in the San Joaquin Valley in the last 3 years. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but if you're not, you should be. This has helped add to their unemployment problem in many of the communities there of 30%. There has been more than 300,000 acres of farmland that has had to be taken out of production because there isn't enough water to grow crops. And what are they going to do? They're going to build a 1,000 megawatt solar power farm on some of the land that is no longer usable. Now, there's also a problem that there's been enough salt water from the brackish water of the irrigation that's come up near the surface. It's basically, when it gets to the bottom of the roots, it poisons the crops because there's too much selenium and boron from the naturally occurring elements in the soil. Now, in 1968, most of you probably are not aware, but the state of Texas had a bond issue on the ballot for $8 billion to build the Texas Water Plan, and it was the follow-on of the California Water Plan. Unfortunately, Texas is geographically hindered in a way that California was not, and that in California the water could flow downhill, and in Texas it had to be pumped uphill. In this case, from sea level to almost 4,000 feet out in West Texas. That involved moving almost 15 million acre feet of water a year, 10 million out to the upper panhandle, and 5 million to South Texas. They do have a serious problem with the depletion of the Oglala aquifer in the panhandle of Texas. Where the water used to be relatively close to the surface and easy to get to without too much problem, when it became later a real problem. Now, with the rise in the price of cotton in the last year, it's like tripled. There suddenly is a huge demand for cotton, and they want to put a lot of this land back in production, and guess what, folks? There's a water problem. Now, if we built the NAWAPA project and had a big reservoir not only in New Mexico, southeastern New Mexico, south of Roswell, but another one in Pecos County, Texas, on the Pecos River, if any of you have ever been out there, we'd have enough water to supply all that. And that could come from the NAWAPA project. And it actually can be easily modified to do that.
It gets 12 million acre feet, actually, from the NAWAPA project.
Well, then they're in good
Texas.
shape, as long as it doesn't all go to Houston and Dallas and San Antonio, and to replenish the Edwards Aquifer. Those of you that have been in Texas know what I'm talking about. Now, North Dakota. You know, people are asking, well, how do we get this project started? And it's been already brought up today. I think we have a solution. It involves oil and gas. There's lots and lots of oil in Alberta. It has to be melted and pumped up to the surface with steam, but you can still do it. Okay. Some estimates say there's up to 9 trillion barrels of oil in Alberta and the Saskatchewan in these tar sands deposits. Now, a lot of it is not easily recoverable. Depending on whose numbers you pick, the ones who want to show that it really isn't very much say it's about 250 billion barrels, and the ones that say there's a lot say it's about 1.4 trillion. Okay, and the University of Edmonton says it's up to 9. Actually, that formation, believe it or not, comes down into Montana, near Malta, Montana. If any of you been there, right at the west end of the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, that's where it ends. And it goes all the way up past Fort McMurray. And then there's two other formations. In addition, and just recently, there has been a new shale gas deposit discovered in northeastern British Columbia that will probably solve the problem of Alberta's natural gas, because it's bigger than the Marcellus Shale Formation in Pennsylvania, which is all the publicity over shale gas that's come up. Nuclear power's greatest enemy is not environmental regulation, it's cheap natural gas. And we've got, when it's down at $4 a thousand cubic feet, nobody wants to go through the effort of permitting a nuclear power plant when we can take 6 months and permit a natural gas plant. Now, that's fine until the price of gas goes up, and we sure have seen that happen in the past, haven't we? And it hurts poor people, more of which, sadly, we have more and more all the time. Okay. Now, here in the United States, we've got another oil formation not far away from there. How many of you ever heard of the Bakken Formation in North Dakota? Okay. The geologic estimates indicate that there's between 300 and 500 billion barrels of oil in that formation, of which, well, pick a number on what it's recoverable. They keep dropping it so it doesn't look like we're having to question why we ever went into Iraq in a war, but that's another question. Down below it, there's another formation called the Saanich Three Forks Formation, which has even more oil than the Bakken Formation. Folks, they're going to be producing a lot of oil for a long time in North Dakota. Now, the problem is every single well that's drilled, and they're talking about drilling 2,000 wells a year for the next 20 years, requires between 3 million and 5 million gallons of water. In an area which, if you've been in western North Dakota, knows it doesn't look like it has a hell of a lot of its own water. The water it has is primarily contaminated groundwater, like with uranium, among other things. And there is a large reservoir in the Missouri River, Lake Sakakawea, which is actually a part of the NAWAPA project. Water is being added to the upper Missouri River. Water is being added to the Lake Sakakawea and the Missouri River, and it actually can flow down through the 5 or 6 dams on the Missouri River, going down as far as Yankton, South Dakota. That can fit into the NAWAPA project, and we could even expand it if we wanted to. And of course, the reason we may want to has everything to do with the growing demand for food. China and India are becoming bigger and bigger factors in the marketplace, and we're seeing rises in commodity prices that are not driven by speculation, they're driven by demand. Cotton, clothes, wheat, barley, corn, soybeans. They produce lots of those in those states. And they're going to run out of ability to have enough water to produce it, and we need to get the NAWAPA project coordinated with that. Where we put it and how we do it, that's another question, but we do need to do it. Another place we're going to need to really add more water is, of course, in the San Joaquin Valley in California, to a lesser amount, but very, very important critically to the state's economy and to the region's economy. I think others have already addressed this question, so I won't say too much more. The idea has come up today about the nuclear complex in Idaho. I agree with that. I think that's a good idea, but I don't think we ought to put too many reactors out in too many places. We got a good place to build them right now at INL. That's where they should build them. I just get real nervous when these things are out all over the place. Keep them secure. Now, I understand that the Areva company in France has already come to the state of Washington. They've been here in the Tri-Cities. They've been here for quite a while, and as you know, they're probably the most powerful political lobby here, I understand, or pretty close to it. Even more than CH2M Hill. I don't know, maybe they have an alliance. Who knows? They wanted to build a nuclear fuel reprocessing plant along with new reactors here. Governor Gregoire says no. They go over to Idaho, get a very different response. And that it may end up there. But actually getting it built in the environment and with the regulatory problems, including what you've discussed today, are very serious difficulties. And of course, the power can really go to the NAWAPA project, especially this 26,000 megawatt pumping facility there at Selway and Salmon on the Sawtooth Mountains for 70 million acre feet of water a year is an important thing. Whether or not we need to do anything in Eastern Oregon or not, that remains to be seen, or with the Owens Valley. Well, maybe it's a lost cause, maybe it's not. But Texas is another story. We do need to deal with that. I do not have right in this room with me a copy of the Texas Water Plan of 1968, but the very nice map in there that all of you have been handed out is just part of this plan. And if the NAWAPA project provided the upstream water in West Texas to make the project work, it would work. I read in there that they were going to need 20 million acre-feet of water for secondary oil recovery in the Permian Basin. Now that's where you take water and pump it down on the ground and pump more oil up. It's carbon dioxide. Whether or not that is realistic to happen, I don't know, because you know they're now talking tertiary recovery with carbon dioxide as long as they have a source for it. And that's another question. But it is very important in all of those states in the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, especially California, Nevada, and then northern Mexico, Baja California, Norte and Sonora, and Chihuahua. And then, of course, to the east you have Coahuila and Nuevo Leon and Tamaulipas. Are all critically in need of water, and of course some of that could come from their own projects, the Pligon and the Plano project, but not entirely, and we may be in a position to be able to help and of course provide hydroelectric power. Mexico is probably going to need 30,000 megawatts of new electric generating capacity in the next 20 years. They will build some nuclear, they'll build some geothermal, that seems to be their renewable resource. And they're talking about burning natural gas. And the problem is they're now already an importer of natural gas. And they may be an importer of oil within 10 years because the Canderel field is running out of oil. And they aren't getting enough to replace it. Now, where does this lead us to railroads? That's the real question. My own personal feeling is NAWAPA integrates in very integrally with the rail project up to Alaska and over to the Bering Strait. First of all, when we build NAWAPA, we're going to have to factor in the design of the railroad. The railroad's going to have, which is something I never did in the earlier study, was what do we do with all these bridges and viaducts when we have all these lakes we got to deal with. It's important, and I think the videos that have been shown have done an excellent job of showing you what is going to have to be done, but still, we still have some things. But the railroad will carry the construction materials and equipment for all the NAWAPA components, plus create a lot of jobs and make for business in Alaska, in the Yukon Territory, and then eventually to go across the Bering Strait. Coming in the other direction, we can be going down through the central part, through the Canada's prairie provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta, to North Dakota, and then south to Texas. Oil. That's a possibility. They're building a 1.1 million barrel a day pipeline from Fort McMurray to Houston, if it gets permitted, which it probably will. But then if they're going to produce 4 million barrels a day of oil, how do they get the rest of it out of there? Because they're not going to be building enough refineries in Canada to process all the oil. And where is most of the refining capacity? It's on the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana. We got to get it down there. Probably some of it needs to go by railroad. There has even been talk of taking oil from Fort McMurray, bringing it up by rail to Alaska, and then putting it in the pipeline near Fairbanks, and then shipping it down to Valdez and taking it out, because British Columbia is just decided to put their foot down and say there is going to be oil exported out of Prince Rupert or Vancouver over our dead bodies. And that sadly is their attitude. It has been recently their attitude about water as well, but that's beginning to change when they figure out how much money they can make. They're already making lots of money selling us oil and gas. They can probably add water. Alaska as well. Governor Murkowski certainly was, and Hickle before him was in favor of that idea. That brings us to a question of what's the fair amount and the fair price for the water. We haven't discussed that among the technical community, but it will, of course, at some point come up as an issue. But you know, there's some political impediments, and that are some of which are environmental we have to face up to. There's been this doctrine created after the NAWAPA plan was presented in 1964 and 65 of no interbasin transfers of water. They mean whatever was in a water basin had to stay in it. It couldn't be moved to anything else. claims that it adversely affected biota and we bring contaminants and so forth. It's a continuing issue between North Dakota and Manitoba over the Red River. Because they have this, while some of the state is short of water, there's a place over in the eastern part of the state called Devil's Lake. You'll see it on the map. There's a Spirit Lake Indian Reservation, because the Indians don't call it Devil's Lake, they call it Spirit Lake. But it's still overflowing from groundwater. It's rising. The railroad has had to be moved. The roads had to be moved. One of the solutions has been to put it in the Cheyenne River that goes into the Red River and send it up to Manitoba. And the Premier of Manitoba says, no, 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 no. This is taking water out of the basin, and we can't let that happen. And the sulfates are going to go up. And God, I don't know why they're worried about sulfates, but they are. Or at least that's what they claim to be. I think it's an excuse just to fight. But, you know, this has been used as the gimmick to prevent any kind of economic growth or development and prevent the NAWAPA project or anything like it from occurring since 1965. That's when this doctrine was created by the formation of the World Wildlife Fund. Okay. Now, another gimmick is, and this affects railroads as well as water, especially railroads, is putting national parks at strategic locations in Canada and Latin America and in Africa along transportation corridors, so suddenly we have impediments to transport. That is, the Darien Gap at the southern end of Panama is probably the classic example of this, and of course this has been part of the work of the World Wildlife Fund and our good friend Prince Philip. But that needs to end. If there needs to be automatic easements granted through national parks and national forests, that's what should be happening. It should be done. National parks should not be used as an excuse to prevent and restrict economic growth and development, and it has been, especially through the World Wildlife Fund. Yes, and of course that brings us to the question of, well, gee, we can give what is it, $16 trillion, did you say, out to foreign banks? And oh, by the way, we can't spend $500 billion on infrastructure investments in the United States? Wait a minute, something sounds fishy with that. Does this sound like the British oligarchy at work? Probably. You know, the NAWAPA project is going to create between 1 million and 3 million jobs. It will reverse our technological and economic decline. It will allow us to foster not only energy development of nuclear and hydroelectric, but also oil and gas, especially in Alberta and in North Dakota. I mean, that, you know, I think all of you need to realize the strategic implications. The United States is now beginning to increase its daily oil production for the first time since the 1960s. 1960s. It's been in decline. And it's beginning to go up again. And natural gas is going up enough that it's a threat to nuclear power, sadly. But it is, especially in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania. We're going to need to develop and use the NAWAPA as part of the vehicle for agriculture development, especially in the Great Plains and in California. And we need to not only export food, but take care of our own needs. I don't know how many of you are aware, but it was just announced last week that, just to give you another example as well, there's been talk of shutting down the Boardman power plant just 40 miles or so south of here. There's a plan of building a coal terminal at Longview, hauling coal from Montana and Wyoming out there and shipping it to China. What isn't generally known is China's coal production is expected to peak in 2013 and then begin to decline.
China's got horrible coal.
And they've mined out the good coal, and now they're going after the bad coal. Okay? So there'll be more transport. And, of course, that is another issue. But it affects transportation. I mean, we can haul coal from all sorts of places by rail, and if we built the Bering Strait Tunnel, we could go right straight to China with not only soybeans and corn and wheat and so forth, but we could also haul coal if we want to. Probably Alaska would be more economical than Montana, I think.
Huge coal reserves in Alaska, too.
Yes, 1.9 trillion tons of coal in the Point Lay Formation, if any of you are not aware. And it's very good coal, 12,000 BTU per pound, less than 0.1% sulfur. Very good coal. Lots of it, and it's less than 50 feet below the surface. The only problem is it's cold there.
It's cold.
And mining is a problem, and even worse is you can only ship coal 3 or 4 months of the year. And it would be, if you had a railroad, you could ship 12 months of the year. And not only that, the huge Red Dog zinc mine up there, not too far away, could be running all the time, shipping The concentrate's down there to Trail, British Columbia, just about 100 and some miles or so north of here. So there's a lot of things we can do with this rail project. And I just think the work that the LaRouche organization is doing is extremely important in bringing these issues up, and the fact that we're developing. In this room is the technological intelligentsia that we need. Now, Michael and David didn't call it the technological intelligentsia, but that's what it is. Even Thomas. Because he and I are, right now, Thomas is leading a project to do what we're doing now. This is not the NAWAPA, N-A-W-A-P-A, this is the AWAPA, African Water and Power Alliance, based in the Congo. I'll say a few words about it if it's all right. The Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, is a very large country. It's the former Belgian Congo. It's in a tropical zone. The equator goes through it. It has huge rainfall. It averages pretty close to 100 inches a year. Most of it's in the wet season. It's definitely a tropical, dry and wet season. It's all summer, though. We don't have any winter there. There's no permafrost and snow, okay? But we have a definite situation where they badly need infrastructure. To give you an example, the electric power generation capacity of the entire Democratic Republic of the Congo is about that of the city of Seattle. And when you look at the per capita usage of electricity, it's about 15% more than Haiti is. It's a problem. There's a real need for economic development. And the river system, the Congo, is the world's second largest river in flow. It's only exceeded by the Amazon. And there is a possibility of huge hydroelectric generating capability. North of there, in the Niger Republic and in Mauritania, are very large, in Gabon, are in very large uranium resources, which of course are useful for nuclear power. They need railroads. They need electric roads, and of course the Congo could serve as the water and electricity place for a large part of Africa.
Tanzania has a lot of uranium too.
Ah, okay.
A lot of uranium.
And of course Mozambique has coal, along with South Africa. And South Africa right now is facing power shortages because they have too much demand and not enough supply, as many other places are. So I think there's a lot of interesting things going on, and I think it's very appropriate that this group met today and that we're doing what we're doing. And I think that, and I hope that this will lead to what we see here begins to come to reality. With that, I thank you.
Did you know that about 3 or 4 years ago they were talking about putting a pipeline up through Mexico across the border into Yuma and building a new refinery in Yuma that would be the first one in like 20-some odd years. They never have done it.
You know why? The existing oil companies didn't want a new kid on the block. 150,000 barrel a day refinery, Clean Fuels, Arizona Clean Fuels, near Welton, Arizona, just east of Yuma. But that's why.
I know they started the pipeline in Mexico and then they just all shut down.
Well, there's a proposal to build a new 15,000 barrel a day refinery on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation that's been waiting for its permits for the last 5 years and hasn't gotten one of them yet. And they've experienced the same problem that our good friends in Arizona did. My understanding, the same problem exists in both places. The pressures are being exerted by the established group that they don't want new people in the game. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Isn't that called a monopoly?
No, that's called the British oligarchy.
Oh. That's a monopoly.
It is, definitely. And yes, there's lots of coal at Point Lake. I wasn't there, but I was not too far away from there at Nome, Alaska. There's no place like Nome if you've ever been there. You can take a road and drive, except going to the south, in the east, north, and west for 80 miles, and then it just stops and there's nothing more. And there's no road, although I understand the Alaska legislature had a debate about building a road in the last session. Whether or not that happens or not soon, I don't know, but I would hope it would. They're in the place where gold mining is a good possibility.
Actually, in Hal's feasibility report for Alaska, which I used to make this video, he said that the governor of Chukotka and Alaska and other people should have a conference on the Alaska-Chukotka Railway in Nome, because there's no place like Nome.
You know, on a serious vein, the former governor of the Chukotka region, which is the area of Russia right across from Alaska, Roman Abramovich, who was one of the richest men in Russia, even though he lives primarily now in London. He bought the London soccer team. He was governor for almost 8 years, and when he first came into office and had to replace his successor, and the way he won the election was he gave 500 rubles to every single registered voter in Chukotka, and you know he won. He could hand out 500 rubles probably to everybody in Russia, and he wouldn't miss it, you know. But anyway, he did. And one of his first acts was he had to pay for the entire expense of keeping the governor of Chukotka going for 3 months until the central government came in with money to get things squared away. And I know this because one of the people I worked with up there was a school teacher, and he lived there. And when Governor Abramovich came in, his entire back wages that hadn't been paid for several months were all paid in one day. So Governor Abramovich, in fact, Governor Abramovich 3 times tried to resign, and Putin said, "No, you cannot resign, we need you." So finally, they decided that he could move to London and take care of his soccer team. And rumor has it that he bought a tunneling machine, but I haven't seen any action on that side of the border. Now, I did meet with the president of the Russian Railway, Vladimir Yakunin, in Frankfurt in January. We talked about the Bering Strait Tunnel, but Mr. Yakunin made it extremely clear to me that they were going to have to deal with a problem with the Lena River Bridge several hundred miles to the southwest before they were ever going to get to be able to build the railroad up to the Bering Strait. And the Russian railway has a plan to actually build out to the Bering Strait from where rail ends now over a 20-year period. And they have a very methodical plan. Now, whether they're going to be able to meet that or not, I don't know, but they certainly have a plan. No such plan exists in official circles in North America, in Alaska, in Canada, or the United States. It's very sad. But they're way, way ahead of us in their planning. Now, some of this has to do with the fact the railroad is owned by the government, but I mean, they're thinking about it because they want to develop the resources of northeastern Russia, which are very much like Alaska and northern Canada. But we seem to be suffering from this malaise that we have of zero economic growth, which is actually economic decline. Russia, I understand, has made agreements with China just recently that to foster some of this economic development in that region. And when we finally get to the Bering Strait to get it built, we're going to need the help of China and Russia to make it work. And that's where Mr. LaRouche's 4-power agreement comes in. And I think all of you are certainly aware of that.
Ever had any dealings with Sarah Palin as governor of Alaska?
No, but when she came in to office, the feasibility study that had been done by the Yukon Territorial Government with the help of Alaska, Alaska's help was to put up 90% of the money, okay? Yukon did the work, they contracted and did everything. The premier of the Yukon Territory, Mr. Fenty, invited Sarah Palin to come over for the presentation of the feasibility study. Well, the reason he wanted her there was he wanted another $3 or $4 million. She was there for an hour, said no, and left, and there's been no discussion ever since, as far as I know. And of course, then she left office. I would not consider Sarah Palin or virtually anyone else in the Tea Party as a railroad supporter, sadly. And of course, those of you that have been following the high-speed rail in this country know that Governor-elect Walker in Wisconsin and Governor-elect Kasich in Ohio have both attempted to prevent the high-speed rail projects in their state from going forward. And sadly, does not speak well for what's going to be happening in the next 2 years if we're looking only at the government doing anything about rail in the United States or anywhere else in North America, sadly. Now, the new governor in Alaska probably is going to be much more amenable to doing something. But I'm not sure how courageous he is. And one of the things that sadly I found out when I went to work up there, you know, you would think that people up in Alaska that were working on the rail would be very receptive to connecting to North America. No, 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 they don't want that at all because they feel that people are going to come in from the lower 48 and be smarter than them and take their jobs away from them. So they say, no, we don't want it. That, unfortunately, It's just another manifestation of this no-growth mentality problem we have in this country.
Additional, along the lines of no growth mentality, the high-speed rail program lacks a vision from the president on down.
Yes.
And so it becomes a political pork barrel. So every state that gets one, they try and turn it into a pork center rather than a national. Like if Eisenhower had decided to build a national interstate program with all state capitals deciding how it would conglomerate, we still wouldn't have an interstate highway system built. So you really got to have a visionary at the top
right.
to take that one on with some key congressional leaders and key group.
You know, it's interesting you should bring this up. I don't know if you're aware of the history of President Eisenhower's role with the interstate highway system, because when he left office, he considered it to be his crowning achievement. It actually began in 1921 when he served as the aide to General Pershing, who was the chairman of the whatever they called the Joint Chiefs of Staff then for the Army. And the two of them went on a tour of the country about building an advanced high-capacity road system across this country, with automobiles were just beginning to become popular and so forth. And they laid out a plan. That was during the 1920s. And I believe the report was completed in 1925, and that led to the formation of the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads, which later on became the Federal Highway Administration when the U.S. Department of Transportation was formed, I think, in the late 1960s. When Eisenhower was the chairman of the or the head of the Army over in Europe at the end of the war, and of course he had a chance to see the German Autobahns. He came back and he said, we need that in the United States. Now, he had already been sensitized to this from having been exposed to it in the early 1920s when he was, I guess, a lieutenant or major or whatever it was. And he felt that this was essential for the country, and it was essential, and those of you that were around and old enough in the mid-1950s know that the debate that took place over this, where this had a very strong consensus of support from virtually every part of the U.S. economy except for the railroads, because they saw it as a threat, very accurately. But they had, by that time, where they were, regulated, they were trying to get rid of their passenger service. They never were astute about dealing with the public. I mean, there was just a whole lot of other reasons why the railroad industry went into decline, and it didn't begin to change until the 1980s. But Eisenhower had the exposure both in the United States and Germany to the need to expand our road system, which is why we ended up with it. And of course, it had very strong support all the way through. The only thing Eisenhower was bothered about in the interstate highway system was when he started to see that it was being used as a weapon to dismantle urban neighborhoods where minorities lived. The so-called urban blight, That was but by that time, nothing could be done to stop it because the program was already too far along. But other than that, he was very much a supporter of the entire program. Those of you that have read any books about him certainly know, or will find out what his feelings were. He felt this was really his crowning achievement as president to bring the interstate highway system into being. And you're exactly right. If we didn't have that kind of leadership, it would never have happened. But at that time, we did.